Hello, and welcome to the Vicars Watch Dibley.
The podcast where real priests talk about pop culture and what we've learnt about faith, life and the church. We've watched Dibley, now we're watching everything else. I'm Kate.
I'm Ross.
And I'm Ruthie, and today we are talking about Bridgerton. So don your breeches and your bonnets, and we are going into the world of Bridgerton to talk about romance and relationships, and also talk about Song of Songs and sex and intimacy and all those things.
Well, a holy happy hello to you all.
Good day to you, sir. Hello.
Ruthie
Hi.
is in character.
What lovely weather we're having.
We're in our parsonages, and you're listening in. We're ready and raring to talk about Bridgerton. But first, we do have a couple of notices. And it's me who's got a notice. Well, it's just an update, really, because I'm about a month into my new job, working at the cathedral, and I've got a new service coming up. I'm trialling a new service.
Oh, excited.
Yeah.
What kind of service are you doing?
Well, so before me, there was my predecessor who set up the family service. And for all sorts of reasons, I take umbrage with the word family service, with the phrase family service. And that's been really interesting, like arriving at a cathedral and people asking me about my family, and me saying, yeah, they're great, mum and dad, all up north, my brother's in Leeds. And then I realise that they're actually just fishing to see whether I am married with kids. And there's like, oh, you're single. Yeah, yes, happily so. Thank you very much. But anyway, so I'm taking over this congregation, who have sort of been in hibernation, really, and launching a new service called, well, I'm calling it Close Call because of the cathedral close, and it's a call to worship. We may have to change that because there is a newsletter that goes out quarterly, also called Close Call. But we'll see. But I'm excited. Planning worship, creative worship that is going to be child-friendly and open to all. Excites me.
Were you not tempted to call it Close Encounters? Just...
I love that. I came up with a whole list. Of close puns. I started off with open and close. I never got Close Encounters down, though.
Yeah.
That could be a good one. Okay. I'll pop them about.
You just
pocket.
needed to talk to a sci-fi nerd. Another sci-fi nerd.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're shutting this down after the Doctor Who conversation. It's my time to shine.
It's your time to shine.
Regency romances.
Well, I think on that note, we're going to move on from the notices. I'm having a ball in Salisbury. I hope you're both well in your ministries.
Yeah, it's APCM season. This is stressful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's APCM season, so it's the annual parochial church meeting, which is the annual meeting of the church, which is okay if you only got one church. It's still quite stressful because you get all the reports, financial reports, report on church activity. It's holding yourself accountable to the rest of the community. With 5 churches or more, it's...
Yeah. Fun! But then it's summer.
My church in Reading had their APCM on Sunday, and I got a message from the assistant priest wishing she was here with me in Salisbury rather than doing the APCM. Bless her. And many prayers for them as they negotiate interregnum. But let's move on away from APCMs and into Regency romance. Ruthie, you've brought us Bridgerton.
I have indeed. when this episode comes out, the third series of Bridgerton will finally be coming out, and it's in 2 parts because they're mean to us. And I'm very, very excited about it. Pretty much all my Instagram feed is various things to do with Bridgerton. And I thought I would bring Bridgerton to the podcast for us to talk about, because I know both of you have watched some Bridgerton. I know that, Kate, you've read some of the books as well.
Yeah.
And Ross, I know that you love Jonathan Bailey. So I thought we could just bring all these things together to talk about them. You're welcome.
What a happy combination.
Can I do a little quibble about pseudo-Regency romance?
Oh, yeah. It's Regency romance
The problem
with
is that
modern sensibilities.
my love of reading, a lot of it started with Pride and Prejudice and kind of actual Regency.
Yes.
So, but I mean, the Julia Quinn books are a good laugh.
Yes, exactly. So I first was introduced to Bridgerton, I think, when I saw that Netflix was picking up the show.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd read the books before it was made into a show.
I didn't know anything about it before it came to Netflix.
I'd seen about it and sent it to my mum saying, oh, look at this show, this looks like it'll be really good. And Mum was like, oh yes, I have all the books. And so I watched the first series. I then read all the novels of the Bridgerton series, which refer to the 8 different children from the Bridgerton family. I've also read some of the novels that are kind of spin-offs from that, including some of the earlier Bridgerton family members and the Smith musicals and all of these extra things, which is super nerdy. So I am fully entrenched in this world. So I was one of those people when the second series came out. I was like, that's not how it happens in the book. Why have they ruined the book? But before I totally nerd out, and this is going to be one of those occasions that either if you've got a bingo card or a glass of something lovely with you, you may want to shout bingo or take a drink every time I say, but in the book they do this. So tell me about your own experiences with it as well then.
Yeah, so I think I've said before, and I've just already said I love Pride and Prejudice and I love Jane Austen. My obsession, my hyperfixation with Pride and Prejudice extends to reading Pride and Prejudice variations. That is because Pride and Prejudice is out of copyright. It's basically Pride and Prejudice fan fiction, but published, right? And in one of my periods of hyperfixation and finding a perfect Pride and Prejudice variation, I encountered the Julia Quinn books, and so I read a few of those as well. And I particularly remember one which was about I think it's maybe a Bridgerton neighbour marries one of the boys who is a doctor in Edinburgh, but it starts off as a contract marriage but then becomes a real one, I think, as I remember it.
That is a particularly good one. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to nerd out. Hold on. Carry on. I'll fact check you.
I mean, whilst Ruthie's doing her fact checking, I can just say that I know Bridgerton from when it came to Netflix. I've not read any of the books. I don't know anything about it. But I think it's jolly well made for what it is. I think it's a really fun genre. I think it's a really fun production. I like the way that they take modern music and Regency-fy it. I know that some people take issue with costumes, but I think they're making creative choices, which I think are fun and consistent with the world that they are building.
Exactly. It's one of the things I really appreciated about the adaptation. When everyone else was saying, oh, it's not period accurate, my personal response was, well, the books aren't period accurate. So it's accurate to the books and the world of the books. And it kind of demonstrates, this is fiction and it's lovely, in a way. It's not biting social commentary. It's kind of fantasy. It's Regency fantasy.
And the whole setup of a regency society is one that has rules that must be overcome in all, it's so much more interesting than in a society where two people fall in love and it's like, great, well done.
Well, and particularly, we'll be having a conversation about Song of Songs later, so about kind of romance and attraction, and that in the Regency period, particular, just you couldn't touch bare skin. Both parties had to be wearing gloves, and scandalous to be left alone together. And there's some really interesting stuff out there about how in Jane Austen's works, or a lot of the courting happens actually breaking propriety and breaking of those social rules. But also, I mean, when I was in university, I wrote an essay about Pride and Prejudice and zombies, which is a rewrite of Pride and Prejudice. I talked about how the zombies were a manifestation of repressed Regency sexual desire, because they always appear in that book often when the height of a romantic interaction is happening.
Wow, that's cool. Well, one of the things that you get with lots of adaptations of Regency stuff now is a real focus on the touch and the first touch. And I think it's one of the... is it the Keira Knightley, Matthew McFadden, Pride and Prejudice?
Yeah.
That hand flex, though, where he's helping her into the carriage.
And everyone swoons.
And that moment.
Yeah. Well, and I think because of the amount of rules in that world, however we imagine it, because let's face it, none of us actually know what it's like to live in that society, because anyone who lived there is long gone. There is a certain sense of the titillation of the breaking of the rules, and of it's naughty and it's exciting in a way that perhaps just like normal interaction. It's just it would just be a normal interaction in modern society. Oh, I just shook a man's hand.
Yeah.
Oh. Oh my goodness.
Now, Ruthie, have you checked your facts?
I'm struggling, and it's going to irritate me, and I will probably text you later to say it was this particular book.
Okay.
But is it the one where she's pregnant and she gives birth and he's a doctor and they get married in Scotland?
I'm there in Scotland. I will have to look at my Kindle.
We'll come to
I'm sure it's buried somewhere in the hundreds and hundreds of books I have on Kindle.
So, Ruthie, you gave us a specific episode to watch. You gave us Series 1, Episode 3. Yeah. Do you want to talk us through what happens in that episode and why it's significant for our conversation today?
Whenever we record these, we try to think of a specific episode that would be a useful thing for us to watch as part of it, which I struggled to with this particular one, to know which one to go for, because it's kind of a theme that goes through all of it. It is, as we've said, about that kind of intimacy of touch, and I wasn't quite sure which one to go through.
So shall we start with the story that is being told that we're focusing on?
Yes.
Who are the characters?
In the this is where when you reeled off all the Doctor Who's, here we go. So we have the Bridgerton family.
Can you name all of the Bridgertons?
Absolutely. Bridgerton family, who are the key family in the book series, and each of the books focus on a different particular child. So we have, in alphabetical order, because that's how they're named, Anthony, Benedict, Colin, Daphne, Eloise, Francesca, Gregory and Hyacinth are the 8 children who are part of the Bridgerton family. And there's other families connected to it. So there's the Featherington family, and Penelope Featherington is a particularly key character for lots of different things. You also have the Cowpers and Cressida and all this kind of stuff. So there's different characters, but we focus on the Bridgerton. So each of the books is about the love story of each of the Bridgerton children. And so Series 1 focused on Daphne, Series 2 focused on Anthony, and Series 3 is going to focus on Colin, which goes away from the book order, because technically we have Benedict before we deal with Connor in the book order, but they've decided to do that as part of this. And I was trying to pick an episode for us to think about, because I'm making my partner Nat rewatch all of them, because I wanted to rewatch them all before the third series, and she decided that she would be interested in watching along. And was it this episode? Like, she's fully in now, like completely involved. Like shock noises coming in as part of the episodes and going, oh, I can't believe he said this, and is fully invested now. But I picked episode 3, which is called The Art of the Swoon, because it talks a lot about. So in this story of Daphne meets the Duke of Hastings called Simon, and they decide the classic romantic thing to do of they have a ruse that Simon doesn't want to get married, but wants all the mamas of the ton to leave him alone. Daphne wants a husband, and her brother has got in the way of it, and so they decide that they will pretend to be courting in order that she will seem desirable and he will be perceived to be unavailable. And in this particular episode, they're kind of they're bouncing off each other about what it means to courtship and romantic interest and things like that. And they have a series of quite deep and intimate conversations about what it is to be attracted to someone, and how they're talking about sexuality and sexual attraction. And we'll say it straight away now, we are going to be talking about sex and relationships and attraction and desire and all these things in here. So if you're listening, Mum, I'm really sorry. But for all of you
to
today...
be fair, Catherine did give you her Bridgerton books.
Exactly, so it's Mum's fault.
She's got the whole collection. You brought this on yourself, Catherine.
Yeah, so I picked this so that we could talk about this kind of intimacy and the boys know stuff and the girls don't. So there's a character in it called Eloise who's fantastic. I can't remember if it's this particular episode, but Eloise and Penelope are best friends, and they find out that someone's pregnant, but she's unmarried, and both of them are like, I don't understand, how can you be pregnant, be with child, and not married? I thought you had to be married as part of it. And they're both wanting to know how this happens. Eloise, so she can avoid it and all this stuff. And so she walks into the sitting room with the rest of her family there and just announces to the room, how does one come to be with child? And her mother's shocked. The other girls are like, oh yeah, I'm actually quite interested in this. And the boys are like, I can't say anything. And there's a real divide in knowledge of arousal and sexual experience. All of this in Regency England as it's perceived in this. The boys are allowed to do whatever they want and have mistresses and things like that. And the women are kept completely in the dark until the day of their wedding. And
even then,
yes,
it's sort of a, you're told perhaps, it's that kind of lie back and think of England kind of thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Your husband will want to pay you intimate attention.
Yes. The marital
It will
act.
be unpleasant.
Yes. Yeah, and there's very different understandings of what the purpose of sex is. So the girls think, oh, it's just something the boys enjoy and it's the way that you have children, where the men are told, like, this is the way you get your pleasure and this is the way you enjoy it and you have a great time, and the girl's just there for it.
Yeah, it's one of those really interesting... Yeah, it's that kind of interesting world building of there was a time in history where it was like that, and it actually still is in some places of the world, in some communities, and in some families, and there is a disparity and an imbalance of knowledge and power in that, and sort of particularly this episode, we're seeing Daphne really trying to work out. So I'm supposed to be finding a husband, but what what am I actually looking for? No one's telling me
Yeah.
what this connection is that I'm supposed to be looking for. If no one's going to tell me, how am I going to know that this is the right person? Because particularly in this episode, she's being presented with another suitor, a good other suitor, whereas until now people have thought, oh, she's holding out for the Duke, you know, but now there's a prince on the plate.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So the kind of matches that people are looking for are people of suitable station and high rank and financially well off, and the kind of liking each other isn't necessarily a factor for some of those who are preparing for marriage, whereas Daphne's
in this level of society.
Yes, Daphne's quite different because her parents had a love match, and so that is what she wants for herself. She wants someone that she can love, which isn't the priority for other people. So you've got like the Featheringtons and their mama. She's got 3 girls that she perceives as somewhat unmarriageable, so she'll just shove them to anyone with a pulse who's the right part of society.
Yeah, and one of the ongoing features of the Bridgerton world, in the books at least, is that the Bridgertons are seen as sort of almost scandalous with how much the couples love each other, but particularly that initial family, how many children they have, and they're all named alphabetically, and
it's very kitsch.
It's very kitsch, but there is, you know, the thing is, it is seen as unusual that and almost improper that this couple love each other so much, and can't stop having children.
I think it's a really interesting thing that the way that society has shifted since then, because now love, certainly in the Western world at least, the assumption is you are getting married because it is a love match. And having been part of conversations around marriage in the church, I don't know that a lot of our theology and liturgy necessarily reflect that. And certainly the way that we talk about relationships seems to mirror this idea that you fall in love and you get married, when actually that is not the assumption that lies at the heart of, I would argue, the marriage ceremony and most of our theology.
I mean, I think we've inherited a teaching that assumes that marriage is, although also for where love will grow and develop and there will be fidelity, it's for procreation, but we live in a practical theology and in a society where that's not true, because we recognise that many different types of couples love each other and want to be committed to each other and have families together, whether children are involved or not.
Yeah, but that still is in the kind of the beginning bit of the marriage service. We have, you know, what is the purpose of marriage? And it is about mutual companionship and love, but it does talk about it being a place to have children and to stop us falling into sinful desires.
There is a bit in square brackets, though.
Yeah.
So childcare is about
can
be omitted, and it's always good practice to check with the couple and not to make an assumption as to whether or not they want that to be a part of it.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about marriage today. We're talking about smut.
Absolutely.
So sure, Daphne's looking to get married and the Duke isn't. But actually, they have this conversation when they're on one of their fake walks down the Ton. And the Duke has a conversation with Daphne about body. Let's put it that way. And Ruthie, do you want to talk us through that conversation?
So, yes, Daphne's questioning about what she's wanting is part of a marriage. And she wants a love match, but she knows that there are things that are important for couples that are not just friendship. There's other aspects of it, aren't there? And she's questioning and badgering Simon about what are these things that I'm looking for? I don't know. No one tells me anything. I'm not informed of what it is that I should be searching for. And Simon's like awkwardly trying to avoid this because he doesn't want to have the sex talk with this girl that he's fake courting. But he makes this comment about, being horrified by the fact that women aren't taught anything. And so Daphne finally convinces him to explain what he's on about. Look, and he's like, it would be improper and I can't do that. And she's like, yeah, it would be improper if we were actually courting, but we're fake courting. So help me out here. What is it I'm looking for? And what is it that is that kind of extra part of marriage? And he tries to wiggle his way around the question, and he says, what happens between a man and a woman? It's like, when two people love each other very much, they have a special cuddle. And he describes it as it's the kind of natural conclusion of what happens at night. And she's like, what do you mean? Like, when I'm sleeping? And he's like, no, before you're sleeping, the thing that you do then. And she's like, she just doesn't get it. And then he talks about masturbation, about touching yourself. And she, her like eyes are like deer in a headlight. She had no idea that this was a thing that she could do. And he invites her to explore her body and know what her body is like and how it feels and what feels good and what doesn't. And talks about reaching a pinnacle as part of that. It's like all the Regency ways of trying to say sexy things without actually saying them out loud.
Without saying climax.
Yes, we can't
orgasm.
say that. Yes, they talk about it quite a lot as in these books about there you go, bingo. Le petit mort, so that the little death,
I was gonna say
as the French describe it. And she's shocked as she suddenly discovers this new world about herself, and that there is this extra element to her as a person. She's got her personality, her character, all these different things, but also she is a woman and she has these desires that she has not been allowed to explore because of the time and area and Regency and all of this kind of being part of the ton. It's all shut down until you're married. And then she's told about it. And I wanted us to talk about this, partly because I think there's real parallels between Christian understandings of sex and relationships, and that in lots of ways we kind of are kept in line in the same way of, yes, sex is a wonderful thing created by God, for some people, primarily just for creating children, depending on your tradition, but it's something to explore as a couple, but only once you're married. So, find someone you quite like and go, oh, maybe they give me slight butterflies in my stomach, but don't think about doing anything until you are married. And that's very similar in kind of Regency ton society.
Even down to in some circles, not all holding hands, not being left alone with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to be chaperoned at all times. And so I thought it was an interesting parallel to talk about those things, but also tie in the book of Song of Songs. So, because, let's just put it quite bluntly, Bridgerton, it's sexy. There's sex scenes as part of the books. There's sex scenes as part of the films as part of the TV series. And it's a bit racy. It's a bit erotica kind of as a book because of that. It's Jane Austen, but with sex and with modern ideas about love and relationships and all this kind of stuff. Why do we love the smut? I am asking you. This is not rhetorical.
Oh, you're asking us.
Because
sorry,
it
that's
releases
not.
endorphins in the brain.
Because it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just doing a less sciencey version of what Kate said.
Makes you feel good.
Well, it feeds the fantasy. I imagine there's something about something about storytelling is that you put yourself in the place of certain characters, and you learn something or discover something about yourself. And I think there's something about smut, so it is called, erotica, whatever, where we get to explore a different part of ourselves that is kind of really rarely expressed. Probably for most people, unless you've got a very high libido that you are able to actively
deal with,
actively manage.
The sex.
I wasn't sure what verb to use then.
The sex in smut books isn't necessarily particularly realistic. But I'm just going to say something extremely, extremely feminist here. One of the purposes of these novels is as they're dismissively called women's literature, romance novels, is that they are really for like women who are feeling unfulfilled in their relationships and are not receiving the care and attention and focus of their partner in the way that the characters in these books are. So one of the, I think I saw it was a reel on Instagram or something where someone was saying to, this was particularly to men, read your wives' books because you're going to feel really inadequate, and but also that's what she wants. And this is a sense of, I think, one of the reasons that the genre, it has exploded in the past few decades. It's always been around. It really has always been around. Even in the Regency periods, there were racy novels, even if they were heavily policed. But I think as literature has been more available in many different ways, from fan fiction to ebooks to libraries, just having an availability of for people who feel unfulfilled in their sexuality to be able to live an experience, even in the imagination, what fulfillment
do we
could
think
be
that
like.
this is, of course we're going to mention at some point, the 50 Shades of Grey effect, that this book came out, exploded, is not a good example of relationship as part of it, but it, people were sat reading it on the tube and straight up filth they're reading publicly, of actually allowing people to express this kind of sexuality and desire, and all of this became a far more public thing. Do we think that was the catalyst, or?
I don't know. I'm going to share a little story about the first time I bought a Mills and Boon book in a bookshop. So before that, I had come across the romance books in the library because I was precocious and I read at
Tiny
a level
Matilda.
far higher than I was. But, reach your teenage years, having friends' mums talking about Mills and Boon, and actually just for some bizarre reason I was in a really positive environment that was encouraging me to not even consider that there should be any shame associated with reading, quote unquote trashy romance. So having previously gotten these books, I think there was a particular series as well that I really enjoyed within Mills and Boon, and a new one was released, so I went to the bookshop and got it, and there was this guy, and I think he was in his early 20s, on the till, and he looked at me and he said, "Have you ever read one of these books before?" And it was just this kind of judgment of shame. Yeah, it was like you're a young woman, you shouldn't be looking at this. So there's something, I'm really against the shame that gets placed on people for enjoying these sorts of books. But I think, popularity of things like, I wouldn't say just Bridgerton, I think there's been other really big series. Christine Feehan was a really big one for the paranormal romance becoming popular. Reese says, "Oh, I need to find out about Christine Feehan."
What about you, Ross?
I think, well, I've not, I don't know that I've ever read any proper erotic novels, not that I can think of anyway. I've not read a Mills and Boon, anything like that. I have read sort of young adult gay fiction, akin, things like Heartstopper, and
Heartstopper.
And that, and I've got a couple of others upstairs as well. But what's interesting about that is that they are not smut. They are very much romance.
Yeah.
And maybe there is sort of more homosexual, gay, erotica novels out there, but they're not in the way. Certainly not growing up was I aware of them, and I wouldn't have known to look out for them because I didn't know I was gay. But actually, I think it's more healthy to have, if you like, gay romance than gay erotica, because there is a dearth of healthy romantic relationships between same-sex couples in literature, and most of what we see tends to be unhealthy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't say that I've had an awful lot of it. I was really interested by what you said, Kate, about in your story about the shame that you kind of felt because you were buying this book and you shouldn't have been buying this book. And what's interesting is that you get a different kind of shame that Daphne experiences in the scene that you were talking about, Ruthie, because she doesn't know. There's the bit where the Duke says, when you touch yourself, and she looks confused about what he means, and then he says, kind of shocked and shaming her, says, you do touch yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think I felt that really strongly because there's because of the ignorance.
Yeah.
So Daphne is being shamed for not knowing anything about her body, about sexuality and sensuality. And Kate, in your story, you were being shamed because you're there holding a Mills and Boon book.
Yeah.
And they're kind of opposite, but related in that sense of we're being shamed because of our bodies.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we experience in culture. I think particularly as young women, I speak that as my experience, where there's a dual shame of either one, seeking to engage with your own sensuality, or not having engaged in any way. So, if you haven't had X number of boyfriends, if you haven't yet had sex, or if you whatever, there is also a shame of, well, what's wrong with you?
And Daphne gets both ends of this, doesn't she? Because she gets the shame of, not knowing what this is about, and then he gives her permission to go and explore it. She does that. They meet the next day. He's at this point decided that he's going to break off their fake courtship in order that she can actually go find her husband. And then she's like, why are you doing this? Is it because of what our conversation yesterday? And so she's experienced this kind of pleasure and gone, I understand a bit more about me. And then she's shamed into going, because we've talked about that, you've got rid of me. And it's that angel saint, you've always got to be on a pedestal of virginity and purity and all this kind of stuff. And then she suddenly finds herself tainted, which is not the case. And it's a theme that runs throughout all of the books, and the shame of being caught, in a compromising position, even if there's nothing sexual about it. It's completely innocent. You just happen to be in a garden together at the same time. You got to get married, otherwise you bring shame on everyone.
But then there's also, I think that dichotomy is also explored with there's the kind of the other plot with the, so I can't remember her name, the lass who's with child, Marina and her guardian mother forges a letter from her beau, ending their liaison, because she's with child. Yeah, isn't that?
Yes, and the shame of her. She believes their relationship is based on love, and that it happened over cake at church and all this kind of stuff. Not the getting pregnant bit, but the beginning of the love. And she believes herself to be in love with an honourable man, and then she's is shocked into what appears to be reality, that actually has gone, I'll speak like that when what's the phrase she uses? Men speak of love when they want to make love, and that kind of thing. And then suddenly, you're a child, that's a problem. I'm not interested, and that's your issue to deal with. Rubbish!
So speaking about shame, it seems that women can't win when it comes to sexuality either way. But there is one woman who does not feel shame, who is shameless.
Absolutely.
And I do have sat in front of me a book by Lutheran minister Nadia Bolz-Weber, which is called Shameless, A Sexual Reformation. And part of it includes a description of a woman who is shameless. And then it transpires that the woman that Nadia is writing about is not a friend in Denver, but is in fact the woman who is described or narrates the majority of the text, the Song of Songs. And so, Ruthie, do you want to give us a little introit to the best song, the Song of Songs?
Exactly, the best song, Song of Songs. This is a kind of a book in the Bible that I feel as a teenager you discover and go, oh, this is the racy bit of the of the Bible. And it's a bit weird, because if we take all the descriptions in it literally, then there's some really weird ways to compliment women and men as part of this. But it's a collection of love poetry, and it's this story of these two lovers who are really blunt and obvious about the way that they fancy each other, and that they find each other really, really attractive and want to be intimate with each other. And there's lots of them kind of meeting and parting, and they're searching for each other, and it's this series of poetry where both the man and the woman talk about how much they love each other, that they want to be intimate with each other. And it's a book of the Bible that and it's in the Hebrew Torah as well, that has had a series of different interpretations. So the original kind of Jewish interpretation of it was that this is God talking about Israel, Israel talking about God, about the nation of Israel's love for God. And then the Christian interpretation of it is slightly different, in that it's Jesus' love for the church. And that's how it's talked about. And then another interpretation of it is, no, it's just two people saying that they fancy each other, and the importance of romantic, erotic love between people who care for each other.
I've got in front of me the Robert Alter translation. So I'm going to give you an expression of the scriptures, which are sort of lovely,
and then I'm going to give you some of the. For us, Ross?
Maybe. But then I thought I'd also give some of the imagery that we perhaps wouldn't use or find in the Bridgerton series, but is there in Scripture.
Okay.
So in chapter 1, "Oh, you are fair, my friend. Oh, you are fair. Your eyes are doves. Oh, you are fair, my lover. You are sweet. Our bed is verdant too."
Feel I might need a fan at this point. Goodness, Ross.
And then chapter 4.
Oh no, don't.
"Ruthie, your hair is like a herd of goats that have swept down from Mount Gilead. Your teeth like a flock of matched ewes that have come up from the washing. All of them alike, and none has lost its young." Kate, "Like the Tower of David, your neck, built gloriously. 1,000 shields are hung on it, all the warriors' bucklers." And then, it's not fair to name either of you for this next one. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, that graze among the lilies.
Maybe that could be your phrase to yourself, Ross.
I went to a dance class yesterday to try and get my breasts into shape so that they would be less like fawns and more like...
You see, Ruthie, it's interesting you said that the common Christian interpretation of Song of Songs is that it is about Jesus' love for the church. I always just thought it was part of, like, just one of the King's awkward love poetry.
Oh, really? Were you not
just
told
been
that
recorded.
as a...
Well, no, I've been told it, but I've never thought... I just thought, I was like, no, it's just love poetry. We had, in further biblical studies at Cranmer Hall, where we all trained, Richard Briggs, who was one of our tutors, I think he talked about one of the theories at the moment, which is actually this is a type of marriage liturgy as well. That there was a form of the marriage service, maybe. I'm reporting what he has said, someone else has said, so this is telephone here. But he had said something about there is a way, this kind of exchanging of poetry and the different speakers. It could be that kind of, it's like a marriage liturgy as well. I just think I love that it's wild, it's sensual, and it's about saying, all of this has a place in our faith experience. Yeah. I get really annoyed when these sort of things are just turned down to say, oh no, it's the God and the church. It's like, no, it's like human relationships are celebrated because God made us like this, and it's okay.
No, it's all a metaphor, Kate. It's all a metaphor, for God.
How dare you?
I particularly, in my heart, I know it's not true, but I particularly like the idea of it's like, the King's published his awkward love poems and we've got to keep them.
Everyone's got to read my erotic novel.
It's like, it's Shakespeare's sonnets.
Yeah.
Like, well, like, Yeah.
When I did my very first wedding, I gave a Bible to the couple. But in my sermon as well, I talked about Song of Songs and talked about it as erotica for them to go and read to each other later. That was my very first wedding. That was great.
One of my early weddings, I was trying to make the point of what these couples do to each other is they talk about how much they love each other and how they adore each other and the things that they love each other about each other. And so I accidentally used the phrase gush love upon each other and talked about gushing love quite a lot. And then realised, as I was saying it, when I could see my partner in the congregation going, sharp, stop using the phrase gushing love. But yeah, we're all talking about it now as these are lovers talking to each other. But I was definitely taught that you are to think of this as a metaphor for the church, of how much God loves the church, and to ignore the kind of sexiness of it, because it couldn't possibly be in the Bible, having this kind of thing. And we've talked before on the podcast about purity culture and the kind of, don't do anything till you get married, then have a lovely time. But actually people are so ignorant, they don't know what that means and understand how that could feel for themselves.
It's a sanitization of scripture, which I think if Song of Songs is ever used, it becomes, it's metaphorical. Or, people gloss over David's many lovers and exploits, some of which are really non-consensual. And talk about what a great king he is, and how fantastic the romance between David and Bathsheba is.
It's a romance.
I sat through one sermon where someone talked about how it was on the Seven Deadly Sins series, and someone said, and King David never experienced envy, and I was like,
He saw a hot girl in a bath.
He literally killed someone. Oh my goodness, because he was jealous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
But
So I think we also mentioned a bit earlier how maybe kind of from this kind of Christian purity culture experience, one of the reasons we like these Regency novels is because some things just haven't changed culturally in the church. I think, I know me and Ruthie, and I think Ross, as you as well, we kind of grew up in churches that said, you know, yeah, you shouldn't...
If it's got a swimsuit on it, don't touch it.
Yeah, don't be a stumbling block.
Yeah, especially if you're a woman.
And don't... Yeah, be aware of what people might think about, you know, if you've got your male friend visiting at your house, and make sure you're not alone. And there's a certain sense of just not... You're not meant to know. And any conversations that come up about, you know, or things danced around a lot, actually. Sometimes it's not explicit, and it's not, don't masturbate, don't explore your sensuality. It's just kind of erased in a sense of, well, you know, particularly for women, or it just it's not talked about. If masturbation is talked about, it's only boys that it's talked about.
Yeah, and with the conversation of lust as part of that, it's, you know, it's impossible to do one without the other, and it's all related to lust, which is one of the deadly sins, and yeah, it's...
And you should just get married instead.
Yeah.
Like, if you're having those feelings, if you're having those urges, just get married instead.
Thanks for that, Paul.
Certainly for me, that, you know, the whole sort of purity culture effect kind of gave me this idea of you don't have sex until you're married, and marriage is a man and a woman, and actually what it did to me was it did a lot more, well, you know, a lot of objectifying of women, because instead of looking for someone that I might love and get on with and want to do life with, instead I was looking for the person who would tick all of the boxes.
Yeah.
The person who was socially, in the eyes of culture, pretty. Someone who was kind. Someone who was a Christian. Someone who... And actually... that probably did a bit of a number on me in terms of working out that actually I wasn't attracted to women in a sexual way, but actually they were all platonic friendships, and I'm gay, and maybe I could, but there was nothing. I mean, I had this book when I was a teenager, which was like, it was a Christian teenage guide to growing up or being a teenager or whatever, and it was an A to Z, and it had a section on homosexuality under H, and it basically said nothing, and then said go talk to your pastor, and it's like, nope, not gonna do that. But yeah, and that's, you know, it was like, we're gonna be cutting edge and talk about all these things, but actually what it does is it kind of just reins you in, and boxes you in, and shuts down conversation and exploration.
There are assumptions out there as well with all of this about how you are attracted to someone. That, you know, you've got the book of your book on how to be a bloke, and homosexuality is just go talk to your pastor, but no, thank you. And we understand now in society that there's a larger range of attractions and how people express their sexuality, which is, you don't get the full spectrum of in the Bible, do you?
Well, I think there is more of it in the Bible than we're taught and that we're allowed to see.
Absolutely.
So not just whether you're gay, whether you're straight, you know, but also in terms of whether you are allosexual, that means you're sexually attracted to people, or whether you're kind of more on an asexual spectrum as well. I personally think there's a strong reading to say that Paul is on the asexual spectrum.
Ooh.
And I think I think that particularly then gives you a really interesting reading about his teaching about sexuality.
Yeah. He just doesn't get it.
Yeah, but a lot of the interpretation in the church has been done by cis, straight, white men.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah.
I think what's really interesting as well I was on General Synod up until recently, and we were having all these conversations about sex and relationships. And what's really interesting is that, in some ways, we're there to talk about sex, but nobody really wants to talk about sex. So everything is about sex, but nothing is about sex.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because one of my friends there on Synod is asexual, and she's like, where am I in this conversation as a single asexual woman? And so it's fascinating because so much, I think, of the biblical interpretation that we inherit comes from a very narrow focus and perspective on the world and scripture. And as you said, Kate, that tends to come from the white, educated, straight, cisgendered men. And actually, what does it mean? And when you open up that dialogue to include other voices. And there are some really exciting voices that are coming to the fore at the moment around theology of the body. Whether that is, Jarrell Robinson Brown talking about sort of black queer bodies, or Karen O'Donnell, who's talking a lot about bereavement and grief, especially with regards to women's reproductive. And so there's a lot of conversations happening at the moment about a theology of the body, which includes a theology of sex and sexuality.
Should we go back to an old school theologian as well? So we're not just listening to straight white men. I'm going to talk a little bit about St. Teresa of Avila, who was a nun, and she wrote about the intimacy that she understood with God. And she wrote this quote. It's known as St. Teresa of Avila's ecstasy. It pleased our Lord that I should see the following vision a number of times. I saw an angel near me, on the left side, in bodily form. This I am not wont to see, save very rarely. In this vision it pleased the Lord that I should see it thus. He was not tall, but short, marvellously beautiful, with a face which shone as though he were one of the highest of the angels, who seemed to be all of fire. They must be those whom we call seraphim. I saw in his hand a long golden spear, and at the point of the iron there seemed to be a little fire. This I thought that he had thrust several times into my heart, and that it penetrated to my entrails. When he drew out the spear, he seemed to be drawing them with it, leaving me all on fire with the wondrous love of God. The pain was so great it caused me to utter several moans, and yet so exceedingly sweet is this greatest of pains, that it is impossible to desire to be rid of it, or for the soul to be contented with less than God. And so this is a lady who is a nun, she has taken a vow of celibacy, and yet she's having this vision, understanding the love of God, and it's a really physical and emotional and spiritual and all these things combined. And it sounds orgasmic, to put it very brutally. This is the way that she is enjoying
the sweetness caused by this intense pain.
Exactly. She's enjoying spending time in her body with the love of God. And there is a sexuality to it. Yeah. And it's an intense experience. And and it combines all those things of body, mind and soul and love and intimacy all into one vision.
And they're meant to be connected. They're meant to be, God made us these embodied beings. We are meant to, not feel shame about
how our bodies work.
Or I think the most distressing thing I've ever come across, not the most distressing thing I've ever come across, let's say it. One of the things that has really kind of hurt my heart in past years is when I switched to moon cups for my period. I'm going to talk about periods. Sorry, Ross.
No, don't you dare apologise to the man on the podcast about talking about your body and what your body does, that's an act of shame, Kate. So don't you feel ashamed. I'm not ashamed of you talking about your periods.
Good. Well, anyone who feels squeamish about this, sorry. When I switched to moon cups after a while, and I was looking at sort of various different options for reusable menstrual pads and stuff like that, kind of trying to be more eco-conscious as well. I came across a YouTube comment on, there was a video of someone who was making her own reusable pads. And there was a conversation in the comments about whether, can you use cups? Can you use, reusable pads? And there was, I think, someone who self-identified as a 14-year-old girl and just expressed so much disgust in her own body that really made me sad at the world. That this is our culture. That we teach people who have the internal sexual organs, people who have ovaries and menstrual cycles, to be ashamed of our natural bodily functions from, all aspects, from just the monthly patterns to desire and pleasure, and it just makes me so upset, and I hate that.
It's so sad, isn't it, how I think women especially, but everyone as they're growing up is just so ashamed of their bodies, and we just think bits of us are just disgusting and we don't want to talk about it, it's gross, and because I think especially as Christians, the way that we have been taught sometimes to think about our bodies as this evil thing that doesn't connect with God in the way that we want it to, and it's just this thing that we should get rid of, and all our desires and things like that are just evil bad things that we shouldn't want, and that's not always the case. Yes, it is sometimes that we desire the things that aren't helpful for us. But actually, for teenagers growing up, it's so difficult to work all that out about yourself, about your desires and what you like. And and going through that is such a painful process.
Or the worst, just the worst place to be when as a teenager at the start of secondary school, as a young woman, was always changing for PE. Because people would notice, you started your period, or how developed you were, how not developed you were, or it was just or what your body looked like or didn't look like, or it was just
I wouldn't want to be a teenager again. It's
nasty.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's really important that we do work these things out about ourselves, about what we enjoy and what we like, and not just from a sex perspective, but just for being a human being and getting into good and healthy habits with ourselves, of knowing who we are and what we are interested in and what we desire and all of this, and knowing where those healthy boundaries are for us, and where we need to look after ourselves, and having a healthy relationship with our body and our sexuality and who we are as a person is just so important.
However, will we know what's unhealthy if we don't know what healthy?
I do want to just, I suppose, end with a word of caution. We've talked quite openly today, and that's because we know each other and we are comfortable and safe with one another. So we are able to be vulnerable with our emotions with one another. But I think there, when talking about sex, but also when engaging in the way that our bodies work and discovering how our bodies work, actually, that in itself is a very vulnerable thing. And whether you are married or whether you are single, whether you are sexually active or whether you are not, actually there is a need to look after yourselves in that process of exploration, I think intimacy is something that is a beautiful thing to be cared for, and I don't think that's the same as purity culture that says, therefore, put it in a box because once it's gone, you're ruined forever. But actually, there is something about the opening and the softening of your heart that does open you up to hurt and abuse from yourself as much as from any other people. So do be careful out there, listeners. Know that you are loved, and may you learn to love yourself and to let others love you as you deserve to be loved.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Vicars Watch Dibley. Thank you to Nat for editing our ramblings.
Any opinions expressed are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Church of England or any other organisation with which we are affiliated.
If you like our podcast, leave us a review, follow us on social media and share it with your friends. And, as always, bless you for listening.
A famous teacher of arithmetic who had long been married without being able to get his wife with child. One said to her, "Madam, your husband is an excellent arithmetician." "Yes," replies she, "only he can't multiply."
Hey!
Oh!
Brutal.